K9 dog stops in front of police car and begs for help. Cops turned pale when they saw it. The rain lashed down in relentless sheets, hammering the deserted Montana highway as Nathan Brooks gripped the wheel of his battered pickup, the windshield wipers slashing a frantic rhythm against the dark. At 58, his silver hair glinted under the dashboard's dim glow, his firefighter's hands steady despite the ache of old scars. Beside him, Shadow sprawled across the seat, a German shepherd with fur black as the night, his amber eyes half closed in trust, a loyal shadow forged through years of quiet nights and roaring flames. The truck's tires hummed on wet asphalt, streetlights flickering like dying stars, until a blinding glare erupted ahead, shattering the peace with a roar of oncoming steel. Nathan's pulse spiked, his voice a gravelly bark as he yanked the wheel. "Hold on, boy!" Headlights, too close, too fast, screamed down the wrong lane. A juggernaut aimed straight for them. The truck skidded, tires shrieking, but the impact was a thunderclap. Metal crunched, glass exploded, and the world spun as they plunged into the ditch. Pain seared through Nathan's chest, his head slamming the wheel, blood blooming hot down his temple. "Shadow," he groaned, his vision blurring as the shepherd's yelp pierced the chaos. Then darkness swallowed him whole, his last breath a fading thread. The wreckage steamed in the ditch, rain pounding its twisted frame, a crumpled shell of steel and glass. Shadow shook himself, his black fur matted with blood and shards, a gash stinging his flank where the dash had struck. He nosed Nathan's limp hand, a desperate whimper escaping his throat. Nothing. The man who'd pulled him from a burning shed as a pup, fed him scraps by the fire, lay slumped, crimson pooling beneath his silver hair. Shadow's growl deepened, his paws clawing the seat, but Nathan stayed still, too still, his chest barely twitching. Headlights streaked past overhead, cars slicing through the storm, their drivers blind to the crash below. Shadow's ears pinned back, amber eyes flashing with resolve. He couldn't wait. With a grunt, he shoved the shattered door, stumbling onto the slick road, rain soaking his coat to the bone. Each step burned, his leg dragging, but he pressed on, a dark sentinel against the night, driven by a single unshakable need. Horns blared, tires swerved, but he barked, a raw, piercing cry cutting through the deluge, a plea lost to the wind until a flicker of red and blue caught his gaze. A mile down, a police cruiser idled on the shoulder, its lights a beacon in the storm. Officer James Carter slouched inside, sipping coffee, his radio crackling static, until a shadow loomed, a soaked German shepherd bursting from the rain, paws pounding asphalt. "What the?" James choked, coffee splashing as Shadow reached him, jaws snapping at his sleeve, a frantic bark shattering the quiet. "Back off!" he shouted, yanking free, but the dog's amber eyes, wild, pleading, stopped him cold. Shadow tugged again, limping backward, his growl a desperate command. "Follow me." James's hand hovered over his gun, heart hammering, but that stare, raw with purpose, held him. "You're nuts," he muttered, grabbing his radio. "Dispatch, this is Carter. Got a dog dragging me somewhere. Stand by." The cruiser rolled forward, wipers slashing as Shadow led the way, his bulk a beacon through the downpour. James's pulse raced. What was he doing, chasing a mutt in a storm? But the dog's resolve pulled him on, a mile of wet road unspooling until the ditch loomed. Nathan's truck, a mangled wreck steaming in the mud. "Holy!" James breathed, slamming the brakes as Shadow pawed the driver's side, barking louder. He leapt out, flashlight cutting the dark. Nathan slumped, blood streaking his silver hair, pinned by the steering wheel. "Dispatch, crash at mile 42. Mail, critical. Send fire and medics, now!" He barked, prying at the door, jammed tight, glass jagged. Shadow circled, his growls a frantic drumbeat as James tugged uselessly, rain stinging his eyes. Sirens wailed, red lights piercing the storm as a fire truck roared up. Boots hit the ground, a voice cutting through. "That's Brooks, Nathan Brooks. Damn legend." Hydraulic cutters whined, metal screeching as the crew tore into the cab. Mike, a grizzled firefighter, leading the charge. Pulled me from a blaze in '09. He's one of ours. Nathan's body slumped free, ribs cracked, blood pooling, but alive, his chest twitching faint. Shadow lunged, growling low as medics swarmed. Stretcher sliding beneath Nathan. Easy, mutt, James snapped, stepping in, but Shadow shoved past, leaping into the ambulance as paramedics loaded him. Let him stay, Mike barked, doors slamming shut. The siren screamed, tires spinning as they raced into the night, Shadow's massive head pressed to Nathan's chest, a guardian refusing to let go. The highway faded, rain pounding the roof, but the crash's echo lingered. Those headlights hadn't swerved. They'd aimed. Nathan's blood stained the stretcher. Shadow's growl a vow in the dark. He'd find help, or he'd tear through the storm to save the man who'd saved him. The fight was just beginning. The ambulance tore through the Montana night, its sirens slicing the rain-soaked silence as red lights danced across the wet highway. Nathan Brooks lay strapped to the stretcher, his silver hair matted with blood, his chest shuddering with shallow breaths beneath a tangle of tubes and wires. Shadow pressed close, his black fur damp against the gurney, amber eyes locked on Nathan's pale face. A low growl rumbling from his throat as paramedics darted around, their voices sharp over the engine's roar. Pulse dropping, 70 over 30, one barked, pressing gauze to Nathan's temple. Skull fracture, internal bleeding. Get us there fast. The driver's shout crackled back. 3 minutes to St. John's. Hold him! Shadow's ears twitched, his bruised flank heaving with each jolt. But he didn't flinch. His massive head stayed firm on Nathan's chest, a guardian tethered to the man who'd raised him. Officer James Carter's cruiser trailed tight, headlights cutting through the storm, his knuckles white on the wheel. Hang on, Brooks, he muttered, the shepherd's frantic bark still echoing in his skull, a dog that wouldn't quit, dragging him to this wreck. The hospital loomed ahead, a brick fortress glowing against the dark, and the ambulance screeched to a halt, doors flying open as medics leapt out. Male, 58, crash victim, head trauma, unresponsive, the lead paramedic shouted, stretcher rolling fast. Shadow bounded after, his paws thudding the pavement, a growl ripping free as staff recoiled. Keep that dog back, a nurse yelled, but James barreled through, badge flashing. He's with him. Let him through. The shepherd shoved past, tailing the stretcher into the ER, his bulk a shadow dwarfing the white coats. Nathan vanished behind swinging doors, oxygen mask snapping on, scissors shredding his shirt to reveal cracked ribs blooming purple, and Shadow paced outside, claws clicking on tile, his barks echoing down the sterile hall. James sank into a chair, his soaked uniform clinging as he wiped rain from his face, radio crackling with updates. Crash site secured, brakes cut clean, sabotage confirmed. His jaw tightened. Someone had wanted Nathan dead, and Shadow had blown their plan wide open. Damn dog, he muttered, a grin tugging despite the weight. Shadow's loyalty was something else, a force he couldn't shake. The trauma doors stayed shut, machines beeping a fragile rhythm as surgeons prepped. But Shadow's amber eyes never wavered, his growls a steady pulse through the chaos. Sirens wailed again as the fire truck pulled up, its crew spilling into the lobby. Boots wet, faces grim. Mike, grizzled and broad, spotted Shadow and froze. That's Brooks Mutt. Pulled me from a fire once, with him. Legend, that guy. Another nodded, clapping James's shoulder. Saw that dog drag you out there, Carter. Saved his ass. James shook his head, still reeling. Dragged me, knew where to go. Craziest thing I've seen. The crew huddled close, their voices low with tales. Nathan hauling them from blazes, Shadow barking through smoke. A bond forged in flames now fighting to hold. Minutes bled into an hour, the ER a storm of shouted orders and clattering tools. Shadow stayed glued to the doors, his growls softening to whimpers as staff edged around, half in fear, half in wonder. James paced, radio buzzing. Evidence bagged, brake fluid traces, we're digging. His gut churned. Nathan's past, some fire he'd fought, had roared back with a vengeance. The shepherd's ears pinned, sensing the shift. Danger wasn't gone, just lurking beyond the rain. The trauma doors swung open, a surgeon stepping out, scrubs streaked with blood, face grim. He's critical. Skull fracture, broken ribs, internal bleeding. Surgeries are shot, but he hesitated, eyes flicking to Shadow. Insurance is short, won't cover it all. We need approval. Fast. James stood, fist clenching. He's a firefighter, saved half this town. You're telling me money's the holdup? The surgeon shrugged, helpless. Rules. 6 hours in the OR. Specialist team. It's steep. Shadow's growl deepened, his amber eyes flashing as Nathan's life hung on paperwork. He bounded to the reception desk, rearing up, paws slamming the counter with a thud that rattled pens and charts. Hey! A nurse yelped, stumbling back, but Shadow barked, a desperate, piercing cry, his soaked fur dripping onto the tile. Get him out, she snapped, but James intervened, badge glinting. He's begging. Look at him. The nurse froze, then fumbled her phone, hands shaking as she filmed. This dog, he saved his owner, a firefighter. They won't operate without funds. She hit post, the clip flashing online. He needs your help, now. Nathan's fate teetered inside, machines beeping a weakening thread as surgeons waited, stalled. Shadow sank beside the doors, head low, whimpering, a vigil unbroken. James paced, radio crackling. Crash wasn't random, Prince on the line. We're closing in. His stomach knotted. Nathan's enemies were out there, and this wasn't over. The shepherd's growl sharpened, ears twitching as if he heard the threat too, a shadow beyond the storm. The hospital lobby hummed, staff whispering as Shadow's presence sank in. A dog in their halls, a tale too wild to ignore. Then phones pinged, first one, then dozens. The nurse's video exploded online. Retweets surging, hero dog saves firefighter, needs surgery funds. Firefighters unions, old crews, strangers, they saw Nathan's name, Shadow's plea, and wallets opened. $5,000 from Local 19, a voice shouted. 10 from Missoula. Donations flooded in, a tide of gratitude for a man who'd run into flames and a dog who'd run through rain. 2 hours in, the tally hit. Enough for the OR, the team, the fight. The surgeon nodded, mask snapping on. We're green, let's roll. Doors swung shut, Nathan rolling in, Shadow's growl a quiet thunder as he pressed to the glass. James watched, breath held. 6 hours, a razor's edge between life and loss. The shepherd settled, his bulk slumped, amber eyes locked on the doors. Hold on, Brooks, James muttered, sinking beside him. He's not quitting. You can't either. The night stretched, rain easing to a drizzle outside. The hospital a cocoon of tension. Shadow didn't budge. Didn't eat, didn't sleep. His growl a steady pulse, a lifeline to the man who'd raised him. James stayed too, radio silent. The crash's shadow looming larger. Sabotage meant enemies. Someone Nathan had crossed. Someone who'd cut those brakes. The dog's loyalty had bought time, but the fight wasn't over. Not for Nathan, not for them. As dawn crept gray through the windows, the OR doors creaked open, Dr. Emily Hayes stepping out, exhausted, triumphant. He's through, she said, her voice raw. Ribs pinned, bleeding stopped, skull patched, tough as hell. He's waking soon. Shadow surged up, paws scrabbling, a bark bursting free. Relief fierce and primal. James grinned, clapping the shepherd's flank. Good boy. The doors parted, Nathan's gurney rolling out, eyes fluttering open, and Shadow bounded in. Paws on the blanket, a growl softening to a whimper. Nathan, James started, but the old firefighter's hand lifted, weak but sure, finding Shadow's fur. Good boy, he whispered, voice a gravelly thread, and the shepherd's eyes gleamed, loyalty rewarded, a bond unbroken through fire and steel. The sterile glow of St. John's Hospital bathed the operating room as Dr. Emily Hayes wielded her scalpel, her steady hands slicing through the tension of a 6-hour fight to save Nathan Brooks. His silver hair lay matted beneath a surgical cap, his chest a battlefield of cracked ribs and torn flesh. machines beeping a fragile rhythm as blood pumped through tubes. Shadow paced outside the OR doors, his black fur streaked with dried rain, amber eyes piercing the glass, a low growl rumbling with every muffled shout from within. "Pressure's dropping, 80 systolic," a nurse barked, saline bag swinging as Emily stitched, her voice sharp. "Clamp it, now!" The clock ticked relentless, each second a gamble with the man who'd faced fire and won. James Carter slumped in the waiting room, his soaked uniform clinging as he gripped his radio, the crackle cutting through the silence. "Suspect prints match, old case tied to Brooks. Keep watch." His jaw clenched. Nathan's crash wasn't chance. It was revenge, and Shadow's barks had torn the lid off something dark. The shepherd's ears twitched, his growl sharpening as if he sensed it too, a threat lurking beyond the hospital's hum. "Stay put, mutt," James muttered, his boots tapping a restless beat. But Shadow's amber stare held firm, a guardian tethered to the fight inside. The OR stretched endless, Emily's hands a blur, pinning ribs, sealing bleeds, her focus unyielding as Nathan's skull fracture loomed, a jagged puzzle she pieced with steel and thread. "He's a fighter," she rasped, sweat beading beneath her mask. "But we're cutting it close." Nurses darted, tools clattered, and at the 5-hour mark, a faint beep steadied, hope flickering in the chaos. "Pressure's up, 90 over 50, a nurse called, relief threading her voice. Emily's grin flashed, brief but fierce. "Got him, closing now." Outside, the waiting room buzzed, firefighters trickling in, their boots scuffing tile, faces grim with tales of Nathan's grit. Mike, grizzled and broad, sank beside James, his voice rough. "Pulled me from a roof collapse, 2005, shadow barking like hell. Can't lose him." James nodded, his radio crackling. "Suspects ex-Lieutenant Pierce. Arson rap, Nathan pinned. Watch your 6. His gut twisted. Pierce, a ghost from flames, a name Nathan had buried. Shadow's growl deepened, his paws pressing the floor, a sentinel sensing the storm. The OR doors swung open at dawn, Emily stepping out, scrubs streaked, face etched with triumph. "He's through," she said, voice raw. "Ribs pinned, bleed stopped, skull patched. Tough bastard. Waking soon." Shadow surged, a bark ripping free. Relief, fierce and primal, his amber eyes blazing as James grinned, clapping his flank. "Good boy." The gurney rolled out, Nathan's eyes fluttering, and Shadow leapt. Paws on the blanket, a growl softening to a whimper as Nathan's hand, weak but sure, found his fur. "Good boy," he croaked, voice a gravelly thread, and the shepherd's tail thumped, loyalty rewarded, a bond unbroken. Recovery stretched in the ward, Nathan tethered to tubes, his silver hair stark against the pillow, his breath steadying with each day. Shadow sprawled by the bed, his bulk a shield, amber eyes tracking every nurse's move. "He's a fixture," Emily said one morning, her steady hands checking charts, a grin tugging her lips. "Won't leave, keeps the staff on edge." James chuckled, his badge glinting as he leaned in the doorway. "Saved him twice, crash and cash. Videos still blowing up, half the states chipping in." The clip, Shadow barking at reception, had spiraled, firefighters, unions, and strangers pouring funds to clear Nathan's bill, a tide of gratitude for a legend and his dog. "Local 42 sent 10 grand, Mike said, dropping by with coffee, his grizzled face soft. "Missoula matched it, cops too. You're a damn hero, Brooks." Nathan's grin cracked faint, his hand ruffling Shadow's ears. "He's the hero, always was." But the crash's shadow loomed. James's radio crackled daily, updates tightening his jaw. "Pierce tied to arson. 9 blaze," Nathan called out, evidence piling. He paced the hall, his boots scuffing tile, eyes darting as 2 suited men slipped in. Too clean, too calm. "Brooks's room?" one asked, voice smooth, hand dipping to his coat. Shadow's growl erupted, his bulk lunging, a snarl tearing free as he sank teeth into the man's arm, the gun clattering to the tile. "Down!" James roared, drawing his Glock, cuffing the second as the first yelped. blood streaking his sleeve. "Move and you're done," James barked, knee pinning the gunman. Radio crackling. "Code blue. Suspects in custody." Shadow stood guard, his amber eyes blazing, hackles up as nurses swarmed. "Pierce sent us," the cuffed man spat, his voice tight. "Said Brooks had burned. Should have stayed quiet." James's gut clenched. Nathan's fire, Pierce's grudge, a plot unraveling in blood and steel. He yanked a phone from the man's pocket, a message glowing. "If you fail, retreat." "Wider than we thought," he muttered, his badge glinting as security hauled them out. Nathan stirred, his silver hair shifting as he gripped Shadow's fur, voice a rasp. "Pierce knew he'd come." James nodded, his boots still. "He's done. Caught him last night. You're clear." Relief cracked Nathan's grin, his hand steady on Shadow. "Good boy, always knew." The ward hummed, Shadow's growl fading to a purr, a bond forged in fire now tempered by steel, a fight won through loyalty's roar. The hospital ward at St. John's buzzed with sterile calm as Nathan Brooks shifted in his bed, the late morning light slicing through the blinds to glint off his silver hair. Tubes snaked from his arm, his chest a patchwork of bandages over pinned ribs, but his gray eyes flickered sharp beneath the haze of painkillers. Shadow sprawled beside him, his black fur a shield against the white sheets, amber eyes glinting with a vigilance unbroken by exhaustion. The shepherd's growl had faded to a steady huff, his massive head resting on Nathan's hand. A silent vow forged through fire and steel, now tested by a shadow that wouldn't relent. James Carter stood at the foot of the bed, his soaked uniform swapped for dry civvies, his badge clipped to his belt as he flipped through a notepad. "Pierce is locked up. Caught him in a dive bar last night," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "Confessed to the breaks. Arson, too. Your call out in 2009 torched his career, Nathan. He wanted you gone." Nathan's jaw tightened, a flicker of old flames in his gaze. "Bastard," he rasped, hand clenching Shadow's fur. "Thought I'd buried that. Guess not." Shadow's ears twitched, a low growl rumbling as if he sensed the heat of that grudge still burning. Dr. Emily Hayes slipped in, her steady hands adjusting Nathan's chart, her voice calm but firm. "You're a damn tank. Ribs healing, bleeds stopped, skull's holding. Few weeks, you're out." Nathan's grin cracked faint, his hand ruffling Shadow's ears. "Had help. Good boy." Emily's lips twitched, a rare smile breaking her focus. "He's a fixture. Kept the suits at bay." James's boots scuffed the tile, his notepad snapping shut. "Speaking of, those two sang. Pierce wasn't alone. Phone message ties to a bigger crew. We're digging." The ward hummed, nurses darting, machines beeping, but Nathan's world narrowed, his breath steadying as Shadow's warmth anchored him. "Bigger crew?" he croaked, eyes narrowing. James nodded, his badge glinting. "Burner phones, coded texts. If you fail, retreat." Pierce was the spearhead, but someone's pulling strings. Old fire, new sparks. "Your name's on it." Nathan's hand stilled, his voice a gravelly thread. "09 Blaze, warehouse job. Pierce torched it for cash. I pinned him. Thought it ended there." Shadow's growl deepened, his amber eyes flashing as footsteps echoed. Mike and the fire crew filing in, their boots scuffing tile, faces grim with loyalty. "Heard about the suits," Mike said, his grizzled voice rough. "Pierce always was a snake. Should have known he'd slither back." He clapped Nathan's shoulder, his grin fierce. "You've got us, Brooks. Shadow too. Bastards won't touch you." Nathan's chest rumbled, a weak laugh cracking through pain. "Damn right. Good boy's worth 10 of 'em." Days stretched, Nathan's strength creeping back, his ribs knitting beneath bandages, his skull mending under Emily's steady care. Shadow stayed, his bulk a sentinel by the bed, amber eyes tracking every move, nurses sidestepping, James pacing, the crew dropping coffee and tales. "Video's still hot," Mike said one afternoon, his grizzled face soft. "Half the state's talking. Cops, fire crews, kids sending cash. You're clear, Brooks. Debt's gone." Nathan's grin widened, his hand steady on Shadow. "He's the star. Always was." But the shadow loomed. James's radio crackled daily, updates tightening his jaw. Pierce's crew, 3 more IDs, old arson ties, new moves. Watch the ward. His boots scuffed restless, eyes darting as a suited man slipped in. Too clean, too calm, his hand dipping to his coat. "Brooks?" he asked, voice smooth, but Shadow's snarl erupted, his bulk lunging, teeth sinking into the man's wrist, the knife clattering to the tile. "Down!" James roared, Glock drawn, cuffing him as blood streaked the floor. "Move and you're done," he barked, knee pinning the man, radio crackling. "Code blue, 3rd suspect down." Shadow stood guard, his amber eyes blazing, hackles up as nurses swarmed. "Pierce is back up," the man spat, his voice tight. "You're dead, Brooks. Should have burned." James's gut clenched, yanking a burner from the man's pocket, a text glowing. "Finish it, now." "They're circling," he muttered, badge glinting as security hauled the man out. Nathan's eyes flashed, his silver hair shifting as he gripped Shadow's fur. Pierce's dogs knew he'd send more. James's boots stilled, his voice low. "We've got him. Raid's live. You're clear." The ward settled, Shadow's growl fading, his amber eyes softening as Nathan's hand steadied. "Good boy," he rasped, relief cracking his grin. "Always knew." Emily checked his chart, her steady hands pausing. "You're healing. Out soon. Dog's a damn shield." James chuckled, his badge glinting. "Pierce is done. Crew's cracking. You're safe, Brooks." The crew grinned, Mike's grizzled face fierce. "Shadow's worth a platoon. Saved you again." Recovery stretched, Nathan's ribs mending, his skull knitting, his strength surging with each day. Shadow stayed, his bulk a fixture, amber eyes glinting as nurses darted. James paced. The crew lingered. "Raid's a bust," James said one evening, his boots scuffing tile. "Pierce's crew, 5 down, phones traced, old arson ring. Your fire sparked it." Nathan's grin cracked, his hand ruffling Shadow's ears. "Burned 'em twice. Good boy helped." Discharge came swift, the ward's hum fading as Nathan rose, his silver hair stark against a fresh shirt, his steps steady despite the ache. Shadow bounded beside him, his black fur gleaming, amber eyes bright, a bond forged in flames now tempered by steel. James met them at the door, badge glinting, a grin tugging his lips. "Ride's on me. Porch awaits." Nathan's chest rumbled, his voice a gravelly thread. "Beer's on me. Shadow too." The shepherd's tail thumped, a bark ripping free. Loyalty's roar, a fight won through trust's fire. The late summer sun dipped low over Nathan Brooks's weathered porch, casting golden streaks across the Montana cabin as he settled into his chair, his silver hair glinting against the fading light. A cane rested by his side, his ribs still tender beneath a flannel shirt, but his gray eyes burned sharp, a firefighter's fire unquenched by steel or time. Shadow sprawled beside him, his black fur a shield against the cooling air, amber eyes half-closed in trust, his massive frame a testament to a fight won. The highway stretched silent beyond, rain a memory, but its echo lingered, a bond forged in flames, now tempered by peace. James Carter's cruiser rolled up the dirt path, dust swirling as he stepped out, badge glinting, a six-pack swinging in his hand. "Told you I'd bring the beer," he grinned, boots scuffing the steps as he sank into a chair. Nathan's chuckle rumbled, his hand ruffling Shadow's ears. "He deserves one too. Good boy." The shepherd's tail thumped, a low huff escaping as James cracked a can, passing it over. "To Brooks and his mutt," he toasted, voice rough with pride. "Hell of a team. Hell of a team." Nathan's grin cracked, his silver hair shifting. "Always was." The porch hummed, crickets chirping, wind rustling the pines, as Nathan's gaze drifted, his chest steady with a strength rebuilt day by day. Weeks had stretched since St. John's, ribs knitting, skull mending, scars fading under Clara's stew and Shadow's watch. "Pierce's crew's done," James said, his badge catching the sun. 5 locked up, arson ring cracked wide. That 2009 blaze? You burned their empire. They wanted you ash. Nathan's jaw tightened, his hand clenching Shadow's fur. Bastards. Thought I'd stay quiet. Good boy fixed that. Shadow's ears twitched, a growl fading to a purr, a sentinel whose barks had torn through rain and steel, a loyalty that defied the dark. Video's still hot, James said, his grin widening. 500,000 views, fire crews, cops, kids sending cash. You're clear, Brooks. Legend status. Nathan's chest rumbled, a weak laugh cracking through scars. He's the star, always was. Pulled me from fire, now this. The shepherd's amber eyes glinted, his head steady on Nathan's knee. A bond unbroken, a tale etched in fur and flame. The highway stretched quiet, but its shadow lingered. Pierce's plot, a spark snuffed by Shadow's roar, a crew undone by a dog's resolve. Raid's a wrap, James said, his boots scuffing the porch. Phones traced, old arson ties, new blood. Your fire sparked it, Nathan. Ended it, too. Nathan's grin cracked, his silver hair glinting. Burned him twice. Good boy helped. James's badge gleamed, his voice low. They're gone. You're safe. Beer's on me next time. Days turned to months, summer yielding to fall's crisp bite, and Nathan's strength surged. Kane traded for boots, his steps steady on trails once lost to rain. At 59, he was no longer the firefighter who'd stormed blazes, but a man forged anew. Shadow by his side, amber eyes glinting as they roamed the woods, a duo unbowed by steel or storm. You're my shadow, he'd murmur, his voice a gravelly thread, ruffling the shepherd's ears. A bond that had roared through fire, now whispered in peace. The village buzzed with their tale. Mike and the crew dropping by, their boots scuffing the porch, tales traded over coffee. Heard Pierce's boys cracked, Mike said one evening, his grizzled face fierce. You and that mutt, hell of a fight. Nathan's grin widened, his hands steady on Shadow. Good boy's worth a platoon. Saved me twice. The shepherd's tail thumped, a bark ripping free, loyalty's echo, a fight won through trust's flame. Years stretched, Nathan's silver hair whitening, his steps slowing, but his fire burned steady, Shadow's black coat graying at the muzzle, amber eyes still sharp. At 65, he sat on the porch, the highway a ribbon in the dusk, his cane a companion as Shadow sprawled close, a bond forged in flames now tempered by time. James called one crisp fall, his voice crackling through the phone. Pierce's crew, last one nabbed. You're clear, Brooks. Beer's still on me. Nathan's chest rumbled, his grin cracking. Shadow, too. Good boy earned it. The village grew quiet. Mike's crew retiring. James's badge hung, but Nathan's tale lingered. A legend whispered in diners, scrawled in kids' tales. Dog saved his firefighter, they'd say, eyes wide, and Nathan's porch stood as a beacon, Shadow's barks a memory etched in wood and wind. You're my hero, he'd murmur, his voice a gravelly thread, ruffling the shepherd's ears, a bond that had roared through fire, now whispered in dusk. Winter came, frost kissing the pines, and Nathan's breath grew short, years of smoke catching up. Shadow stayed, his bulk a shield, amber eyes glinting as he pressed close, a warmth against the chill. One night, under a starlit sky, Nathan sank into his chair, hand in Shadow's fur. You saved me, boy, he rasped, voice fading. Every damn time. The shepherd's growl softened, his eyes locked on Nathan's, a bond beyond words, beyond steel. Nathan's hands stilled, breath easing, and Shadow's head rested heavy, a final huff, a farewell etched in silence. Spring returned, the cabin quiet, Shadow gone months later, old age peaceful, beside Nathan's grave. The highway stretched silent, its shadow a memory snuffed by a dog's roar. James stood by the porch, older now, his badge retired, kids at his side, firefighter's kin, eyes wide. He ran through rain, he said, voice steady, fought for him, lived for him. That's Nathan and Shadow. The tale endured, clips Tails, a plaque at St. John's. In fire and loyalty, they stood. Montana's pines whispered their story. A firefighter and his dog, forged in flames, tempered by steel, immortal in a bond that defied the dark. What began as a crash roared into a legacy. Shadow, the silent hero, always there.